Picture this. You're sitting around with your friends, and then someone starts to tell a story. Maybe it's a funny story that makes you want to laugh, or maybe it's a sad story that makes you want to cry. Maybe two of your friends work together to tell the story. Or maybe someone interrupted someone else's story to start telling it. Maybe someone asked a question that prompted it. Stories have a multitude of possibilities, and likely all of them are familiar to us. When you think about it, stories are everywhere in our lives. Stories are so prevalent in human society that they actually get studied by scientists. In the field of language and social interaction, conversation analysis allows researchers to transcribe talk and have a methodology to look at what's really going on. For example, let's take a listen to the cramp story. There's actually a lot going on here, and this is where transcripts become useful.
Wait, Sarah.
What?
That medicine really worked. I'm sitting here realizing how great I feel.
You're welcome. I told you it would help.
I was literally dying, Paul. The worst cramps ever. The worst, just stomach pain. My mouth was sobbing. I was in so much pain. I thought I was gonna throw up. But I had only had breakfast this morning. I was there's really not much to throw up. Yeah. I went to the bathroom. I tried taking a breather, and it was just so bad. And so I trekked back here, and I was still feeling shitty after I had toast. So she was take Pamprin.
I love Pamprin.
It was my first time having it. So far, it's working great. All right, can I print if it's on my computer?
First, a little background on the story. The teller of the story is Madison, the active participant is Emmy, and the passive participant is me. We're all roommates, and we're all sitting around talking about our days. Madison uses the story to explain why she took medicine when she did, and also to describe how it worked. The story emerges through self-selection. After a period of silence, I was telling a story. However, there was not a lot of active recipients to it. Madison was not listening, and in line 11, she loudly interrupts me and takes the floor by saying,
"Wait, Sarah!"
Sarah, who also was not an active listener, responds.
What?
This starts a new conversation as Madison takes the floor to tell her story, and therefore the story is self-initiated. Madison makes it known she has a story to tell by enacting a turn-taking violation. She talks over to me to take the floor. When she does this in line 11 by saying, "Wait, Sarah," she projects her extended turn space, making it known that she wants to tell a story. Sarah is a knowing recipient when Madison addresses her because she has previous knowledge of the situation. She knows that she gave Madison the medicine. However, everyone else in the room is an unknowing recipient. This prompts Emmy to ask in line 16 that Sarah knows something that she doesn't. With this curiosity piqued, Madison launches into the story to explain it to the unknowing recipients exactly what happened and all the effects. As Madison expands on the story, there are clear teller-participant roles defined. Madison was asked a direct question, and she directly answers. This makes her the teller. Emmy asks the question and wants to hear the answer, providing affirmation throughout the story as well, in lines 19, 21, 26, and 31. Madison also prepares the recipients for the kind of story that they're receiving. We know it's a medical story, as she took medicine, and so we likely know it will be unpleasant. She prefaces this in line 17 by saying, a blanket statement before she launches into specific symptoms. These statements prepare the listeners for how they should react with such things as concern and sympathy for her pain. Emmy and Nicole are the participants aligned to Madison's story, as when unaddressed, Sarah left the room. Throughout the story, Emmy gave alignment cues throughout the whole thing through words of affirmation and body language, and at the end, she appropriately responds in line 34.
I love Pamprin.
Throughout the story, I aligned myself more passively. I did not give words of affirmation like Emmy did throughout, but I was also listening, and you can see through my body language as I was looking and engaged with Madison. However, it is not until line 35 when I physically engage with Madison by saying
I love Pamprin
that I become a real active participant in the story. It is also noteworthy that the other person present, McLean, does not engage with the story at all and is not a participant. She does not look at Madison or give her any cues that she is listening and does not respond to the story in the end. This is possibly due to the fact that she also knows the story, like Sarah, beforehand. Emmy shows her relative knowledge throughout the story. While she doesn't know why Madison took the medicine, while Madison describes her symptoms, she displays that she understands them by saying, "Oh," and "yeah." I also demonstrate my relative knowledge throughout the story. While I don't respond throughout it, in the end, when Madison says she took Pamprin, I respond, "I love Pamprin," demonstrating my knowledge of the medicine and its effects. Madison has prepared the participants for the type of story they're receiving, so they're able to respond appropriately in the end. By the time she reveals what she took at the end of the story, the participants are properly aligned to give the responses she wants in line 34 and 35. The reception of the story through sympathy and validation of the drug's positive effects show alignment to Madison's point and also displays understanding of the difficulty she experienced. Madison then expands on the effects of the medication in lines 36 and 37 after Emmy's invitation. As she nears the end of her story, she signals this by slowing down her speech and getting quieter. After a beat, when no one else responds, her voice picks up again and is faster and louder as she quickly changes the subject.
It was my first time having it. So far, it's working great. All right, can I print if it's on like my computer? Like, do you have a cord?
There are a lot of things at play here. First, we have Harvey Sack's concept of the inference-making machine, which states that participants are able to use their prior knowledge to plug in the gaps between stories of things that are not explicitly stated. Here, when Madison is talking about cramps to college-aged women who are the listeners, they are able to understand what cramps entail, as it is a common experience shared by all. Therefore, Madison doesn't really need to launch into the symptoms of what cramps are, what they feel like. Everyone is able to plug that information in on their own. This story also shows Kidwell's concept that speakers are sensitive to different states of knowledge. Madison was aware that Sarah knew everything about the story, as Sarah was the one that gave her the medicine. Once it was brought to Madison's attention that there were people present that weren't aware of the situation, she was able to fill them in on the story, constructing a dramatic narrative that was dependent on the fact that everyone was listening did not know what was going to happen in the story, and they were unknowing. Halkowski would argue that this ability to create drama in the story is dependent on mundane backgrounding. Madison could have just described her cramps and said she took Pamprin, and that could have been the end of it. Instead, she constructed a dramatic narrative where she was having an ordinary day, sitting around, and all of a sudden she was struck with these extraordinary symptoms, and none of her usual remedies could help her. This contrast shows that she wasn't looking for anything extraordinary to happen, and that's why it is so dramatic. The field of language and social interaction also emphasizes that we can have very different structures in conversations depending on the situation. If you're having a conversation between two friends or a group of friends, it'll be very different. A conversation between you and your mother or a conversation with your boss would also be structured very differently. We can observe these patterns in conversation and see how they affect us. Some examples of these dynamics can easily be observed by non-LSI researchers. Anyone would be able to see that Madison interrupted, which is a self-initiation claiming the floor. Anyone would also be able to see that she was asked questions to elaborate. This also shows that there were other initiations within the story and invitations for expansion. In addition, most anyone would be able to make the distinction between an active listener or a non-listening participant. If people are giving you good body language and if they're verbally responding, that's a good chance they're listening to your story. If they're not looking at you at all or they're not saying anything, they're probably not engaged. Anyone could make these distinctions, and these conventions are a large part of language and social interaction. Therefore, it does not take a sophisticated understanding of it to start noticing these patterns in your everyday life and making the distinctions and connecting it back to LSI research. Stories are everywhere, but most of us don't really think about what they are. What purpose does a story serve? What dynamics can it show? What patterns emerge in similar stories? What different types of stories are there? Once you start thinking about these questions, you'll notice the differences in your everyday life. In this way, anyone can be an amateur LSI researcher, and also, anyone can learn to tell a good story.